When I was doing it, I couldn't wait for it to be over. If somebody cuts me off in traffic or if someone's a couple minutes late for an appointment, I try, or even like you go to work, it's Monday and you're having like the worst Monday going. I can still like pick myself. I'm gonna go, hey, but you know what? Nobody's shooting at me. Today's a good day.
Joe Mitchell didn't always measure a bad day that way. Before combat, before fighter aircraft, and before the Air Force, he was a kid in Watertown playing with scraps of wire his father brought home from work. From Veterans Voices of Newton, this is today's A Good Day.
I grew up in Watertown, right next to Newton. I was the third child out of five. We were blue collar for sure. My dad worked for the phone company when there was just one, and actually so did my mother, and that's where they met. So my dad was in the Air Force. His name is Joe Mitchell also. He served in the Korean War, and he was an air traffic controller, and he was in country. He was an enlisted guy. And he had a number of, colorful stories about his experience in the military. I was kind of leaning toward it, not especially, but as I mentioned, my dad worked for the phone company, and he would bring home little bits of wire and batteries and bulbs and switches and buzzers and stuff. And I like to play with it, and I'd make little DC circuits and little light bulbs and buzzers. And I hooked up a little telephone between me and one of my classmates with wire taped along the floor between our desks. And with that, my guidance counselors and others said, "Oh, you should pursue a degree in electrical engineering," which I thought was a good idea and wanted to do that. And I got accepted to Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester. And being of blue collar and low middle class, we generally couldn't really afford to send me there. Had some folks talk to me about Air Force ROTC. So here's an opportunity to join the military, to be an officer, to get an education, and serve my country. So this is in the early 1980s. The Air Force definitely had an interest in electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, and aeronautical engineers. They would have four-year scholarships for folks that would enter those fields. And what I learned is making little DC circuits and twisting wires, and which I thought was really cool, is very different than electrical engineering. There is an absolute ton of math, and I struggled, to be perfectly honest, but I held in there, and so I have a degree in electrical engineering, and is very, very different than a simple DC circuit.
ROTC helped turn college into a path toward an Air Force commission. But before Joe ever had to deal with real danger, the Air Force began teaching him what he did under pressure.
Between my sophomore and junior year, entered into field training, which is essentially basic training for officers of ROTC. And mine was down at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. And I remember not knowing what to expect, walking in the door, myself and many other cadets, many other college sophomores about to enter their junior year. A lot of stressful activities, make your bed and stand at attention and fold your socks a certain way, and you only have 2 minutes to get this done. And what I learned later in life, it was artificial stress created to see how you adapt and how you do in those kinds of situations. So, shock would be what I felt initially, and then adapted and kind of rose to the occasion, to be perfectly honest. You're not going to get it done, and the drill sergeants are going to yell at you. It's like, how hard can you try, and do you feel defeated? It's to create an artificial, stressful environment, and can you work with your team? Because perhaps being in the military, there may be some genuinely stressful situations where lives are hanging in the balance, and you want to have some training ahead of time of how to deal with that high level of stress.
At the time, the pressure was artificial. The idea was to learn how to function before someday getting something wrong could matter much more.
My military job in the Air Force, I was an instructor weapons systems officer, or WISO, in the Air Force, is like a co-pilot, navigator, and bombardier in fighter aircraft. I flew the F-111F, the Aardvark. I flew that in Desert Storm. And then after that, I transitioned to the F-15E Strike Eagle. Our mission in the Strike Eagle was to fight our way into a highly defended, high-value target area, strike a high-value asset with laser-guided accuracy, and be able to fight our way out. So I flew the F-111 starting in 1988, transitioned to the Strike Eagle in 1992, and they still fly the Strike Eagle today. So 50 years later since when it was first built, and they're making new ones, the F-15EX. It's just that capable of a platform. So what did I do? I was Robin. So pilot was Batman, I'm Robin. The adage we used was the pilot, he's rowing the boat, and the wizard was shooting the ducks. My service, just generally speaking, in the training environment, you fly, it is fun, but you do it with a purpose. So during, say, at RAF Lakenheath, and it's just a normal Tuesday and you're on the flying schedule, you'll show up pretty early in the morning, typically 4 hours prior to takeoff. And usually, and a fighter jet can, it does pretty well on its own. It's pretty powerful. But if you have two jets, there are synergies by having two separate aircraft, or four or eight. So chances are you're flying in perhaps a four ship, and somebody's the leader of that, and the flight lead will assign. Everyone will start some mission planning. So one of the members will go get the weather. One will try and book a range. One will see if they can find some adversaries to play with us. Somebody will find out what's loaded on the jets. Somebody will determine what fuel we need. So everyone comes together, and meanwhile, while that's going on, the flight lead is preparing his brief. About 45 minutes later, you'll all sit down and you'll brief, and you'll plan the mission. Next thing you'll do is you will brief the mission so that all the members of the formation know what's the expectation. Then you'll step to the jet, you get your tail numbers, you put on your flight gear and stuff like that. You walk out to the jet. Other jets have probably taken off. It gets loud. There's the smell of fuel burning and stuff. It's interesting. Initially, it kind of makes you look queasy, but then you start getting excited, like, yeah, I'm gonna go do this. You fly the mission. Typically, lead will take off, then the other one or three aircraft take off behind him. You rejoin. You either do some air-to-air setups, and maybe go to a range, you drop some small 25-pound bombs that have little smoke cartridges so you can grade your bombing patterns. Maybe fly a low level, go cranking around Scotland at 200 feet at 540 knots, which is about 600 miles an hour. I still remember these numbers. That's 911 feet per second. So when you say 1001, 3 football fields have gone under your rear end. It's scary fast. And you're flying along because you want to fly low so the bad guys can't see you. It's like lifting weights while doing calculus at the same time, because while you're struggling physically, but mentally, where's my wingman? Where's the tanker? Where are the bad guys? How much fuel do I have left?
Flying the mission was only part of the job. Once the aircraft were back on the ground, Joe says another kind of training began.
But then you come back, and this is kind of an important note, and you'll debrief the mission. Because, while you're out there, you learn, like, oh, I did that well, I didn't do that too well. You'll always recap, because you'll learn while you're flying, but you'll learn even more when you pick it apart in a group of your peers. And there's a phrase we say that's all rank comes off in the debrief. So there might be some colonels in the room, there might be some captains, some lieutenants, but when you're talking about how the mission went, everybody is brutally honest, not to be mean, but to be honest and like, hey, colonel, the flight lead might be a captain. Hey, colonel, we briefed you're going to rejoin to the right side. You rejoined to the left side. What happened, sir? Oh, well, the sun was in my eyes, or I thought I'd make room for this or that. Like, well, then lead will say, no quibbling. We said right wing, you're supposed to be on the right wing. And typically everybody be like, yep, you're right. I messed up and I'll try to do better next time. So you learned a ton in the debrief. By that time, you'd probably be close to like you're already been on base for like 10 hours. And if it was late in the day, if you weren't flying the next day, or if it was Friday, then back in the day, the squadrons had a bar. And then after debrief was done, you'd go have a beer with your buddies. And you learn a bunch in the bar, too, in that some of the older aviators would be like, "To tell you about the time back in Nam, we did this and that." And you learn a bunch through their stories. So it was kind of cool. Tell you what, the camaraderie of an Air Force squadron, and it's borderline a cliche when people say, oh yeah, I served with him, he's my brother. And if you're on the outside, you're like, oh yeah, cool cliche. But no kidding, in a squadron, just really, those are your brothers and sisters. And this is a cliche, like, I'll put my life in his hands. No, you do. When someone's flying right next to you, his wingtip is about 2.5, 3 feet from yours. You are putting your life in his hands. When I joined Air Force ROTC, and they're going to help me pay for college and I'll be in the military. And yeah, I won't be in harm's way, because back then it was the Cold War. It's us versus Russia. And if we go to war, like, the whole globe is going to be nuked. So might as well be at the front end versus the back end. Doesn't matter. Still a young guy, like 25, and training in England. And you hear in the news, Iraq, Kuwait, Saddam Hussein, who's this and where is that? And then you realize, oh no, we're going into battle, and quite the awakening.
That awakening took Joe from RAF Lakenheath in England to Taif, Saudi Arabia for Operation Desert Shield. When Desert Storm began, the training schedule became a combat schedule.
I participated in Operation Desert Storm, which kicked off on January 16th of 1991. The war was 42 days or 42 nights long. I flew in the first night of the war. I flew in the last night of the war, and I flew 30 nights in between. There were 10 days I didn't fly. Of the days I didn't fly, I did 8 days of mission planning. So the F-111, it was precision targets. It was big formations. Timing was important. A lot of prep work had to be done. So when I wasn't flying, I was creating packages with maps and photos and frequencies and fuel offloads and stuff like that for my squadron mates that would fly the missions. And so 8 days of doing that, and I had 2 days off. On one day, I got a haircut because my boss was pissed that my hair was so long. And the other day, I just slept because there's a really high operations tempo and people were getting tired and burned out. So I just had one day, and I think I slept for 18 hours or something silly like that. I am most proud of, I flew a mission on February 2nd, 1991. I know the date, Groundhog Day. It's also my dad's birthday is February 2nd. I earned the Distinguished Flying Cross for heroism while engaged in aerial flight. I was part of a 3-ship, short notice, high priority tasking. Saddam Hussein was moving armaments and stuff out of Baghdad down into Kuwait City. There's been an air war up to this point in time, and the ground war was going to start very soon. Came out of command out of Riyadh that, this need to be hit and need to be hit tonight. And so short notice, high value asset, high value target. And the start of Desert Storm was on January 16th because there was no moon. Like they wanted the kickoff to be dark. Well, add about 2 weeks to it and it's a full moon. So February 2nd was a full moon. And everybody with a pea shooter could see us and was shooting at us. And we were Bengal 1-3 on that night. We were supposed to go do something else at some airfield. We had two 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs and two things. One, because of the full moon and we had no support. We had no jammers. We had nobody with us. We're all alone. We briefed it as one pass, haul ass. Like we're carrying 2 bombs. We're going to drop one and bring the second bomb home because it was too risky to do this. And even about a week prior, while we were in theater, it came down from command. Hey, we're beating up on the Iraqis pretty good. And they say, hey, there's no target in Iraq or Kuwait that's worth anybody's life. If it doesn't feel right, just turn around, come home. No shame, no harm, no foul. Like nobody believed that. But, we could just turn around if we had to. We went in there, we got shot at, we got beat up pretty good. And so with those 3 of us, number 3 couldn't take gas on the tanker, so he went home. So it's just 2 of us. And because of the way the winds were and the smoke and stuff like that, usually the first guy in hits the high value target. But because that would have caused the secondary target not to get hit. So number 2, he was getting the high value target. And we went in, we hit our secondary target, we hit it. Those clouds above us, we had to go in low, everybody could see us. There's a few little low scuzzy clouds that affected the IR infrared. So we did some, it was a slice back maneuver. It was hairy as hell, but we hit our target and we got out of there. And number 2 called in and said that he missed. And we're already heading home. We're screaming home, going, let's get out of here. This sucks. And without just a moment of hesitation, me and my crewmate, his name is Mike Buck. His call sign is Buckwheat. And we've been flying with each other for many, many nights now. We didn't have to say much. We knew what each other was thinking. We could see the moves and the grunting and stuff. I forget who said it, but we're both kind of gasped. I missed the target, and we still had another bomb under the wing. And I forget who said it, but let's go. Like he said it or I said, I forget. Okay, and the question is let's go home, let's go back. We turned around, we went back. So the 2 of us went back in. Everybody was lighting us up. No one was surprised that we were there. We dodged AAA on the way in and dodged a surface air missile on the way out. But then we went back in and struck the target and blew the daylights out of that. It was a commercial warehouse, but Saddam was bringing weapons down it and stuff like that. So for sticking our neck way out, striking the target and being successful and getting the jet home in one piece, the Distinguished Flying Cross for heroism while engaged in aerial flight. So that's what I'm most proud of. I carry in my pocket, and I've had it for many years, is a challenge coin, and it's the Distinguished Flying Cross. So this mimics the medal that hangs on my dress blues that I haven't worn in 30 years. And on the back of it, it says Bengal 1-3, 2-2, 1991. And my crewmate has one of these. And we pretty much don't leave the house without it.
Joe returned home from Desert Storm in 1991. At first, he thought returning meant exactly that. He was home. A few months later, at his sister's wedding reception, Someone who knew him saw something Joe hadn't noticed yet.
When I returned from Desert Storm, I deployed back in like May of 1991, and I had some time off. I came home and I was hanging out with my buddies and, kind of telling some war stories and stuff like that. And then when my sister got married in the fall of 1991, I came back to Watertown. And actually, her reception was in the American Legion Post 440. And I was talking to some folks, and someone said, Joe, it's so good to see you. It's so good that you're back now. And I go, wait, I saw you in May. And they said, nah, that wasn't you, Joe. And it wasn't until later, like I'm like, what are you talking about? Of course it was me. But then I realized I was still really amped up and I was still uptight. I was still in kind of, combat mode. And now with the many deployments we've had in recent years, I know the military is aware of this. And when people come back from overseas, they go through some courses and stuff like, hey, your wife and your kids, they haven't seen you much. So, take it easy, take a deep breath, all this kind of stuff. We didn't have any of that stuff. So they just turned us loose on society. But it's just interesting. So people are aware of it now. And I didn't realize it at the time that I was pretty amped up and I wasn't quite myself. But then 6 months later, I was.
Desert Storm was not the end of Joe's service. He continued flying, including later deployments, before leaving active duty in 1995.
So I served in the Air Force active duty from March of 1988 until December of 1995. So I did just shy of 8 years active. I had 4 years of reserve. I went in as a second lieutenant as a young single guy, and I got out as a captain and a married guy with my first child on the way. So I didn't serve 20 years. I didn't retire. People often say like, oh, when did you retire? I didn't retire. I resigned my commission after 8 years, and myself and the Air Force parted company, the best of friends. No one significant moment, but I would definitely say that in hindsight, I find I'm very thankful and appreciative of my service and of the Air Force and what it gave me. So I bet you can do more than you even think you can do, like just the mind and your will and your determination. And so the Air Force gave me in that honesty, integrity, showing up on time. And in a squadron, like if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it because my wingman is counting on me and vice versa. I'm counting on him. Essentially, we have a contract. If I'm lead, you're going to be there, you're going to do these kinds of things, and you're expecting certain things out of me, essentially delivering on a promise. So that is something I got out of the military and as a leader. So in my current job, I'm second in charge of 140 people of a utility. And it comes kind of easy to me only because I've had the training. But not everybody can do that. Not everybody can lead people without completely pissing them off. So it's about building teams like, hey, if we do this, we're going to get this done and we're going to get this out of it. I find that getting people on board, getting their buy-in is the best way to get things accomplished. And that's something that I got out of the Air Force. And it wasn't a moment in the military when I learned it. It was later on in life and reflecting. I'm like, wow, I can do these kinds of things. Like, crap, I learned that in the Air Force. That's awesome. It was like a little epiphany later in life. When I left the military after 8 years, I started with a powerhouse in manufacturing, and it was with a company that recruits what they call JMOs, junior military officers. And they like JMOs because you show up on time, you have leadership skills, you've done technical stuff. So I was recruited by International Paper and worked out here in Western Massachusetts and did very well there. And they asked me after like 6 months, they say, any more where you come from? Because just military people do bring value to civilian jobs with, part of a team and people counting on you and you delivering, it's important and it's kind of ingrained in us and they like that. For my family life, I'm very thankful for the Air Force because I met my wife in the Air Force. An interesting Joe Mitchellism is you meet people and they say, oh, you're a veteran? Oh, thank you for your service. That's a hard one to respond to. But I'll usually brush it off by say, thanks, I did it to get chicks. And then I usually get a smirk out of them. I go, and I was successful. I met my wife in the Air Force. We've married for 33 years. We have an airplane. After the Air Force, I really had the bug for flying, so I kept flying. I bought an airplane. I had these visions of, I'm going to teach my kids to fly. They're all going to go to the Air Force Academy. They're going to fly the F-35. And like, one like, nah, and everyone's their own person. So, and 3 of them went to college too. I'm like, hey, do you want to do ROTC? So there's 3 kids. And I told the first one, like, we have enough money to put 2 kids through school. I need one of you guys to go to the academy or ROTC or something. Nobody was interested. And you definitely don't force that on somebody. If someone wants to serve, like, I can't wait to serve. I want to go serve. That's great. If someone was like, you should join the army, straighten you right out. Like if somebody's not interested, it's not a good idea. Like it is not for everybody. Some people get a ton out of it. Some people go and they can't wait to get out. Like that wasn't for me. But no, my kids weren't interested.
Joe doesn't describe combat as something he would recommend, but he also doesn't separate those difficult years from the person he became afterward.
Would I do it again? The whole thing, soup to nuts, like combat, which was rough. That was no fun when you're doing it. Would I do it again? Absolutely. I gained a lot out of my military experience, which has benefited me, in life, in my civilian life, in my family life, in raising my kids. Like, so some of the things I learned in the Air Force about show up on time and stand up straight and don't slouch and say what you mean, be true to your word. If you say you're going to do something, dude, you better do it. So, and I passed that on to my kids. So, would I do it again? Absolutely.
If they read this biography or have the chance to listen to it like many years from now, what do you hope they remember about you?
Good question. Good question. Tell you what, I did my best. I mean, I was in a very competitive field, got through training and finished second in my class at undergraduate navigator training and finished second in my class at squadron officer school. The idea was like, if you finish at the top of your class, you can get what you want, more likely to get your first choice of assignments and things like that. And I think if you wrap up my whole career, as far as serving and flying, fighting, winning, and facing a lot of adversity, and could have turned around more than a couple times, but just kept pressing forward anyway to get the job done. So I did my best.
Joe Mitchell entered the Air Force through ROTC as a kid who liked wires, airplanes, and the idea of seeing what he could do. The Air Force gave him an education, a cockpit, a squadron, a war he had never expected to fight, the woman he would marry, and lessons he says he understood most clearly only years later. Thank you for listening to Veterans Voices of Newton. I'm Ethan Lee, and to Mr. Joe Mitchell, thank you for your service, your wisdom, and trusting me with your story. To hear more stories, visit veteransvoicesofnewton.org.
Nobody's shooting at me. Today's a good day.